I like the glass onion as a metaphor, an object that seems densely layered, but in reality, the center is in plain sight. Your relationship with these people may seem complex, but looking at what you've done this weekend, it's crystal clear. You've taken 7 people, each of whom has a real-life reason to wish you harm, gathered them together on a remote island, and placed the idea of your murder in their heads. It's like putting a loaded gun on a table and turning off the lights. Glass onion.
You're listening to Writing Roots, brought to you by Aspen House Publishing.
Welcome to Writing Roots. I'm Lee Hull.
And I'm Lee Esses. I am highly amused at that particular quote because it starts with, I like the glass onion as a metaphor, and then ends with, let's kill you. I like this idea. This is fun.
So our topic today is Glass Onion. This is kind of the sequel to Knives Out, but it was in no way connected. It's just in the same universe, I guess.
And the detective was the same detective.
I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was a great work of visual, audio, and in general storytelling overall.
And of course, you can't have a murder mystery without characters.
The characters in this are really well done. They are very uniquely their own. They have wonderful connections with each other. And then you have this random detective that shows up that makes you very confused of why are you here?
One of the key things that I think is very important when putting a murder mystery together is making sure the characters' names are distinct and potent so we can keep track of the cast of characters. We can easily imagine which one in the lineup of the cast, which one is Duke, which one is Birdie. These types of names can be incredibly helpful in keeping track of the cast, and therefore we don't have to remember which one was the blank. We can just view the story and be engaged in who we think is the actual murderer and such.
And that really leans into the character choices that they made, not just in establishing who they are, the very distinct Birdie, the very distinct Duke, the very distinct Andy. There are very few internal plot arcs in this movie. Not a lot of growth is happening until pretty much the very end of the movie, when suddenly you have the whole crew of people coming to grips with a decision that they have to make.
I also thought that it was funny to throw in Daryl just to have him as a red herring. For the first couple of times when he was introduced, he felt like a PA walking onto set, just like, nope, pretend I'm not here, bye. Which made for, at least in my mind, the classic red herring. It's the introduction of the butler did it without actually having a butler.
Yeah. This story did a very good job of taking classic murder mystery cliches and turning them on their head. So when it comes to the character's dialogue choice, this was brilliant.
And I think a large part of that was so much of the dialogue was very easy to pronounce, easy to perform, and easy to follow. It's very tempting when writing a murder mystery to make things convoluted. And the fact that they made everything very easy to follow made us that much more engaged in the characters and the actual mystery that was happening. So that dialogue, huge win in its simplicity.
I also thought it was brilliant how they introduced the characters. So we already talked about their names and how those were very clearly defined. But how they introduced the characters set them up perfectly for who they were. You had Birdie making the absolute most obvious and oblivious suggestions for how to open this puzzle box. And then you had Duke. His mom was the one saying, oh, it's a compass. Oh, it's this in the background. And he's getting angry at her, but his mom is the one solving the puzzle without even looking at it. And then we see the detective. He is in the bath being very morose about his current life and being very bored. And we never see him open the box. And that leads us into the structure, because there's a very good reason why we don't see him opening the box. The structure of the story plays so well with timeline. and going back in time to show us different views, to show us different things, to give us less information to start, and then saying, oh, see, we thought of that too. Here's how we thought of it. Here's this other little piece here a little bit later. Very well done in how they structured bouncing back and forth in timeline.
I do think it was interesting that we had a pretty clear murder mystery without a murder. They didn't tell us anything about the murder that would end up being solved in the first half of the movie. They did a lot of clear trail markers of this is a murder mystery because we have the cast of absurd characters that you'll have to remember all of them. You have the mustache twirling monologue from the villain. And we have a lot of the classic, I accuse you, and this is why.
And what's interesting is that the premise of the movie is that they're all going to this island for a murder mystery party. So we expect there to be a side murder mystery investigation, or that this proposed murder mystery weekend turns into an actual murder mystery weekend. And when it comes to the actual part of the party where the murder mystery is supposed to start, the detective cuts it off right there. He's like, oh, I already solved it, without ever even the game actually starting. So it's this very aware of their plot, their structure, and their purpose, while turning it on its head and having a lot of fun with it. And I can tell that they had a lot of fun making this and setting it up the way that they did. The world building is also very interesting because while there are fantastical elements set up, like the whole idea of what the glass onion is made out of, they did a very, very strong push to plant it in our world. And this in particular was an interesting time for it because they made this movie, I think, during the pandemic, during the part where everybody was quarantined.
Yeah, in a lot of Hollywood content that's come out since quarantine, very little of it even acknowledges that COVID happened. So it was interesting to have it be just a part of the world building in this particular case. And it was mostly to, again, highlight the characters, who's choosing to mask and who's not social distancing because they're partying or whatever.
Yeah, I think that was a very fun way to establish more of the different kinds of characters because you have Birdie, who is wearing a mask, sort of. She has a thing over her face, but it's just this diamond-studded net with a lot of mostly not anything covering.
I do think that it's interesting how you have, in most stories, you have one impossible thing. You have a little bit of a room to play with reality in order to make this world feel unique. You have Batman, you have physics that works a certain way, you have magic, you have something impossible to make it feel distinct and interesting and separate from the world that we live in. In this movie, they kind of did the opposite. While they still had that impossible technology, they made a concerted effort to plant it in our world with things like the pandemic, with the mention of Philip Glass and these other name-droppy people that they threw in. They wanted it to feel as real as possible. We even burned down the Mona Lisa because that was something that we all could wrap our minds around.
And all of these choices, all of the little pieces of world building, establishing real world connections, establishing even some of the fictional things, it all served character building. Every single piece of world building was connected to the characters. And that, I think, is the most brilliant thing that we could learn from this movie, is how to connect the world and the characters, because most of your readers are going to care more about the characters, and you need to introduce them to the world. You do it by connecting it. They did it very smoothly in this movie, and it's a great place for us to learn from it.
I also thought it was interesting to have the whole cast together and have Bronn go through and give, here's 2 seconds of your backstory, here's 2 seconds of your backstory, this is how we know each other, this and that and that. They literally had like a mugshot lineup of the entire cast and give their relationships to Bronn not just who they were as a character, but who they were in relation to him in one scene. Filling that first hour didn't feel like filler at all because of moments like this, where here, I'm going to give information about everybody, and now we have a deeper understanding of who the cast is. And that is just some great writing and something that can be done really poorly or done really well. And I think they did it really well.
Overall, the story technique that they used in this was very good because, yes, it has a lot of very strong ties to classic murder mystery. Even the name Benoit is kind of a callback to Agatha Christie's detective character Poirot, and all of these very strong callbacks. But it is so unique in its own way because of how it used timeline, how it used characters, and the subtle art of suggestion to even twist in the viewer's mind what actually happened.
The next thing we're going to be watching is also meta in a very fun way. And I think it'll hit a little closer to home because you are all authors. So we're going to be addressing Stranger Than Fiction, which is a lot of fun as a storyteller because you get to see a lot of those moments that you recognize as an author that my dad, when watching it next to me, would not find nearly as amusing. So head out and watch Stranger Than Fiction next. And then before we get back, make sure that you take some time to
write selfishly.
If you have a question or comment for our hosts or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at writingroots@aspenhousepublishing.com or find us on Facebook by searching for Aspen House Publishing.